Shalom, I'm Rabbi Michael Panitz. I'm the Rabbi of Temple Israel of Norfolk, Virginia, and I'm speaking to you from the pulpit of my congregation. Today is the middle of the festival of Sukkot, the festival of booths, also known as tabernacles. It's a harvest holiday. We give thanks to God for the bounty of nature, and we also have a prayer for rain. And that's the occasion of my message tonight, which is entitled Water for Blessing and Not for Curse, which is a quote from our prayers. Water for blessing and not for curse. What images do you call up when you think of people praying for rain? For much of my life, I associated that kind of prayer with the practice of Native Americans in this arid Southwest. I recall a scene in that delightful comedy, the film The Frisco Kid from 1979, where in the midst of a drought, the tribesmen are praying for rain. They're doing a rain dance. The rabbi in the film, having impressed the worldly wise Indian chief by his courage, is sharing a repast with the chief during the rain dance. The chief asks the rabbi if the Jewish God can be approached in prayer for rain. The rabbi responds in the negative, delivering an enthusiastic sermon about how our God does so many things. He softens our hearts towards each other. He helps inspire us to be our best selves. But, and here the rabbi's voice rises, he doesn't make rain. Just at that moment, remember it's a comedy, there's a huge thunder crack and the rain comes pouring down. The rabbi turns on a dime and he says, and then, just like that, God changes his mind and gives us rain. It's probably a stretch to probe such a film screenplay too philosophically. But the scene in The Frisco Kid does at least raise the issue of whether in our scientific age we should think that we have outgrown the attitude that the way you get rain is you pray for it. I would respond that it depends on what you think you are doing when you recite a petitionary prayer. Even today, there are Jews whose prayer is essentially a specimen of magical thinking. I have no quarrel with them, but that is not my religion. I now frame the act of prayer as an acknowledgement that as humans, we are not gods. We are creatures, and we need to behave as such. We need to remember that God has created a world that is larger than us, larger than our wants. We need to live responsibly in such a world. And so, we will be praying for water, fresh water, rain. If that is not a bit of magical thinking, what should be our takeaway from this prayer that we're going to recite on the 8th day of our holiday? Water, the essential chemical for life on earth. Much of life has evolved in salt water, 35,000 parts salt per million. But we and our fellow land creatures require fresh water, fewer than 1,000 parts per million. The inexhaustible water of the world ocean is not potable. As Samuel Taylor Coleridge said in The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, water, water everywhere, nor any drop to drink. For our overburdened planet, with far too many humans alive than our planet has ever had to support, and with human-caused climate change stressing the web of life to the point of mass extinctions, fresh water is becoming an endangered resource. Access to fresh water is now a critical issue, a matter of life and death on a large scale. The World Wildlife Fund reports, quote, some 1.1 billion people worldwide lack access to water. A total of 2.7 billion find water scarce for at least 1 month of the year. Many of the world's systems, the water systems that keep ecosystems thriving and feeding a growing human population, have become stressed. Rivers, lakes, and aquifers are drying up or becoming too polluted to use. More than half the world's wetlands have disappeared. At the current consumption rate, this situation will only get worse. By 2025, 2/3 of the world's population may face water shortages, and ecosystems around the world will suffer even more. Into this increasingly desperate situation, Israel, that little giant of a nation, is a world leader in providing solutions. Israel is showing the world how to avoid dying of thirst and of the fratricide that thirsty people will commit. Globally, 70% of fresh water is used in agriculture. Facing an arid climate, Israel has pioneered the conservation and recycling of fresh water. What Israel lacks in natural resources, it makes up in the application of human intelligence. High-tech solutions and simple creativity allow Israel to conserve liquid gold, as water is known. Consider the following examples. Item: Israel uses high-tech monitoring to discover leaks in water systems. Israel's leakage rate of irrigation pipes is 7 or 8%, 4 times below the worldwide average of 30%. Item: Israelis invented the now famous drip irrigation. In 1965, the Israeli company Netafim, which means droplets, introduced this revolutionary method of bringing the minimum necessary amount of water directly to the roots of the growing plant. Today, drip irrigation waters 75% of Israeli agriculture. Israel makes it available around the world, but still only 5% of the world's farming uses it. For its growing cattle industry, Israel uses wheat rather than corn silage. That is because the wheat can be planted before the winter rains and is grown without irrigation. Item: in 2007, Israel installed low-flow shower heads and toilets throughout the nation. This, plus a national system of wastewater plants, allows Israel to recycle nearly 90% of its wastewater for its crops. By comparison, the United States is at about 1%. But conservation is not enough. Already a quarter century ago, Israel faced honestly the likelihood of a fatally drought-stricken 21st century. When Americans were subordinating climate concerns to short-term partisan wrangling and irrational culture warmongering, Israel developed a holistic approach to water management, incorporating both conservation and the conversion of seawater to fresh. The result was a breakthrough in the age-old desire to make desalination affordable and feasible. Israel now leads the world in this field. As recently as 2015, Israel's demand for water was outstripping its natural potable supplies by 1 billion cubic meters. But today, Israel produces 20% more fresh water than it needs. It shares its surplus, 200 million cubic liters of water annually, with its neighboring state of Jordan, supplying about 10% of Jordan's water needs. in return for environmentally responsible solar energy to power its electrical grid. How did Israel accomplish this dramatic turnaround? It improved the process known as reverse osmosis, in which seawater is forced under high pressure through a membrane that traps the salt and allows the water to go through. Between 2005 and 2015, Israel established 5 desalination facilities using this technology. The largest of them, Sorek, south of Tel Aviv, produces 150 million cubic meters of fresh water per year. To achieve this dramatic result, Israel had to overcome the engineering obstacles that had long made experts worldwide consider desalination a last resort. The problem is known as biofouling. Microorganisms grow on the lattice of the membrane being used for the reverse osmosis procedure, rendering it ineffective. Clearing that biofouling was expensive, and the chemicals on which it relied introduced fresh environmental problems. Edo Bar-Ze'ev of Israel's Zuckerberg Institute of Water Research and his colleagues solved that problem. And I'm going to quote, Bar-Ze'ev and colleagues developed a chemical-free system using porous lava stone to capture the microorganisms before they reach the membranes. It's just one of the many breakthroughs in membrane technology that have made desalination much more efficient. Desalination used to be an expensive energy hog, but the kind of advanced technologies being employed at Sorek have been a game changer. Water produced by desalination costs just a third of what it did in the 1990s. Sorek can produce 1,000 liters of drinking water for 58 cents. Israeli households pay about $30 per month for their water, similar to households in most US cities, and far less than Las Vegas or Los Angeles. And this is from Scientific American in July of 2016. The happy result of these breakthroughs is that, quote, the Sorek desalination plant in Tel Aviv produces 20% of the water consumed by the country's households. It produces clean water from the sea cheaply and at a scale never before achieved, demonstrating that seawater desalination can cost-effectively provide a substantial portion of a nation's water supply. And that is from the journal Green City Times, 2022. With much of its water coming from desalination, Israel could at long last stop the unsustainable practice of over-relying on the Sea of Galilee for the bulk of its drinking water. In the early years of statehood, Israel built a national water carrier system, drawing water from the Sea of Galilee. Actually, it's not a sea, it's a freshwater lake, drawing water to slake the thirst and develop the agriculture of the growing nation. But the demand was unsustainable, and the water levels dropped to the point where the entire ecosystem of the lake was endangered. A few seasons of heavy rain have helped, and the water levels in the Sea of Galilee are now finally back at their historic high levels. But more fundamentally, Israel's desalination infrastructure has progressed to the point where now, if the need should arise, Israel can take the fresh water it has produced and use it to keep the Sea of Galilee at its proper level. It can open, as necessary, the Degania Dam, built by the kibbutz pioneers in the 1930s, and never opened, so that a rush of waters can restore the Jordan River to health. In the prayer for rain, which I mentioned at the beginning of this message, the worship leader asks that the water we receive be livracha velo liklala, for blessing and not for curse. God is the ultimate source of all blessings. When we transform seawater into fresh water, we're not replacing God. We are honoring God by using properly the gift of intelligence with which God has endowed us. We are God's very junior partner to bring bracha, blessing, into the world. Worldwide, there is no time to waste. Let us follow the example of Israel and learn to treat fresh water as the blessing God made it to be. Amen.